This call is being recorded.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another conversation ahead of Social Media Weekend. We're super excited to have these conference calls as a way to get people connected before the big weekend, June 1 and 2 in New York City. And it's going to be hosted by the CUNY Journalism School. And I'm Sri Srinivasan, at Sri on Twitter, at SriNet on Instagram, and hope we're already connected. Thank you so much for joining us. We are in for a treat because we're going to be talking about innovation and journalism and media and all kinds of cool stuff with Burt Herman. Burt is the co-founder of Storify, one of my favorite platforms, and the platform is having a milestone tomorrow. It's going away, sadly, and I thought we could use this as a kind of exit interview with Burt. Of course, Burt has not been associated with Storify for several years now. He'll clarify just how many, but I think there are lessons in both its success and where it's ended up, and we'll talk also about his work as Director of Innovation at the Lenfest Institute for Journalism. So please join me in welcoming Burt Herman. Hi, Burt.
Hi, Sri. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for doing this. How does it feel to know that Storify is meeting its end?
Yeah, it's definitely a sad thing. I mean, I knew it was going to happen before the public announcement came because, I was a little bit in touch with one of our former employees who still works there. But then when it was publicly announced, yeah, it kind of hit me as sort of a sad thing. I mean, it's not totally going away. There is still a Storify product inside Adobe, which now bought Livefire, which bought Storify. So there's part of the product that is still continuing, but it's not the free kind of service that was, what it was when we launched, and pretty much the same as it was when we launched. That this platform for telling stories using social media, which you very graciously said kind things about and promoted at a lot of your events. So I hugely appreciate you for being an early adopter and helping us in the early days.
Well, thank you. Well, it's very easy to promote and appreciate great products. I want to get back to Storify in a minute, but I just want to remind folks that if you're listening to this live or in the next day, the public version goes away on Wednesday the 16th, probably at midnight. And so that means you need to export your files. The good news is that there is a way to export them as either PDFs or HTML pages. They will not work the way you do. They're working for you now. I have about 57 that I want to save. So I have to now go in and do the process of exporting. It's on every Storify page. They tell you how to do it. So I encourage everybody to do it in the next day or so. There will be ones you want to save as PDFs so you can kind of memorialize the work you did. Burt, were you able to export all the ones you wanted?
I don't know that I probably should. I need to take a look and make sure I do this too. Yeah, it's a good reminder. Yeah, I need to do that. Yeah,
that's funny. Yeah. So
I mean, I think a lot of them were ones about the company, so I guess I'm not sure whether I need to keep them or not. But yeah, and for events that I hosted and stuff like that. Yeah, but good point.
That's funny. Well, let's take a step back. Tell us your story and tell us how you ended up inventing one of the most useful platforms for storytelling in the social age.
Thanks for saying that. Yeah, well, I mean, my start was as a journalist. I worked for about a dozen years at the Associated Press, mostly as a foreign correspondent. So that was kind of my background in doing all this, and it was 2008, 2009. I had the chance to take a step away from my career and do the Knight Journalism Fellowship at Stanford, where I'd earlier gone to school too, and it just happened to be that this was a time when social media was really taking off as a source for news and just a way to engage between people online. So that it was the year that Twitter really started emerging as a force in media. When Ashton Kutcher and CNN were racing to be the first to 1 million followers on Twitter, which seems very quaint now. And in the plain landed in the Hudson, Sully Sullerberger, right, landed the plane in the Hudson River in New York, and the photo on Twitter was the best photo of this happening. So, this was kind of the backdrop during my fellowship year, and I had gone from thinking about what is the future of being a foreign correspondent and getting information from all around the world to realizing that social media maybe is the answer to this, and both as a way to get stories and consume stories, and was just trying to figure out ways to bring together journalism and social media.
And it worked. It's hard to imagine going in as a foreign correspondent and emerging as a tech entrepreneur in a way. What kind of coding skills did you have at the time, or was it about partnerships that made this possible? And of course, you were then doing the classic pivot that everybody talks about when you're building products.
Yeah, well, it was very much a partnership. I mean, I was co-founder. I had a co-founder, Xavier Daman, who was from Belgium, and he was the person who was a great partner and product thinker, and he coded the first version of the app based on kind of designs that we put together. But I guess what I always say when I talk to people about this story is it's not like, yay, had the idea, did the fellowship, came out with the idea, launched it immediately, get money. It was not at all clear. Like this line, it actually was it was after I finished the fellowship. I wasn't really sure what I was doing. I had some different ideas. I tried working with different potential partners. I ended up meeting Xavier. We started working on a different idea originally, and kind of backed into what became Storify, and eventually ended up launching that product, raising some money, and kind of building it further. But in between that time, I had like a year and a half where I had zero salary, and was trying to figure out what was going on when I was on leave from my job again, and wondered what I had done with my life, going from this, being a bureau chief for these to having roommates again and not being sure what I was doing. So it's it was not a straight journey at all.
Well, let's talk about maybe some lessons you learned along the way that helped you build a product, and kind of from, I presume, a napkin type of idea to something that actually worked. If you can talk a little bit about that, walk us through it.
Yeah, well, I at the fellowship at Stanford, I did spend a lot of time at the design school there, which is kind of the home of this whole user-centered design movement. You could call it lean startups, or user-centered design, human-centered design, are all kind of buzzwords, design thinking for the same thing, which is really, taking a very people-focused approach to what you do. So really, I mean, the way we came up with Storify was kind of seeing what people were doing in some ways, like how people were curating social media. So like, how are people finding interesting things? Let's talk to some of the people who do this, who are good at it, and ask them how they do it and what they would like if they could have a product that does it better. Kind of seeing how people are starting to take screenshots of tweets and sticking them in news stories, and we're like, well, we could make that better. That doesn't make sense to do that. Like, how can we improve on that? So it was, kind of looking at what people are doing and talking to people to really come up with the idea for what Storify was. It was also very much based on my experience, my thinking about how I would write stories as a journalist, and kind of also knowing journalists are very sometimes tech averse and need things to just work and work fast and be simple. So yeah, just trying to make it, be something that could work for a journalist in a hectic deadline situation when they have other stuff to deal with. So, bringing together all these things is how we eventually came up with the idea.
Do you remember the moment the name came to you? It seems kind of obvious now, but
I think we were in the office. I want to talk about something else about that recently. I'll mention a little bit later. But no, I think we were trying to figure out, like, what is this thing? What is this? Okay, so say we're collecting tweets and YouTube videos and Instagram photos, whatever. Like, what is this that you're putting it into? And then it kind of seemed like, well, is it a collection? Is it whatever. I don't know. We tried to think of what is this thing. Finally, we're like, well, it's a story. You're writing a story. Like, it's just a different type of story than a block of text, but it's a story. So let's just call it a story. So then, okay, how do you make stories, whatever? And actually, it's interesting. The word Storify, we use that inside the AP when you would send messages back and forth to a bureau, rather than saying like, hey, can you have somebody write a story about this? You would just say, hey, Berlin, please Storify, and like put the, press release or say what it was below, meaning that that's the person who should write the story, do the main work. So it was kind of like, oh, well, that's what we should call it. Let's call it Storify. And we
I'd
did
never
have
heard
to,
that. I had never heard that. That's great.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, and it is a real word in the dictionary. It actually does mean to make or tell a story. There's some problems with getting a trademark a little bit, but thankfully it's an obsolete word in the dictionary. It was marked as obsolete, so therefore they let us trademark it.
and then you told us a little bit about what happened, and then when did you know this was a business that you could kind of spend time on?
Well, yeah. Well, so I mean, I was, kind of devoting my time to this, I guess, and trying some other things. But yeah, we launched like a beta version of it, and we started getting some people to use it. And then actually, the key thing early on, I think, was that we got into, TechCrunch Disrupt, the conference that is, featured on the HBO series Silicon Valley, where startups go to, launch their products. And so we managed to get into that through kind of luck and talking to the right people at the right time. And that kind of, led to a lot more people using it, and it pretty much taking off. And eventually, we were able to raise some money to actually finally pay ourselves and keep going.
That's great. Now, can you, at each stage here, I want to see what are things that would have been different today in even your own, at your institute when people are doing something like this? What's different between what you were doing in the 09-10 era that would be different for your successors today building something or anything today?
Right. Well, first, yeah, I wanted to mention this thing about the office, how I mentioned we were thinking about the name in the office. So actually, our first office was renting a couple desks from Clout, the other social startup, which happens to be shutting down soon, which I'm sure people remember gives you like a ranking based on your influence on Twitter. It kind of gives you a score on Twitter as to how you are. So we were subletting a couple desks from their office because they were a bigger startup. And that office was actually on the first floor of the building that Twitter was in, like on the top floor in the middle of San Francisco. So, I mean, it was just kind of a funny time when I think like social media was really hot and everybody in San Francisco had a social media startup of some kind. I mean, whereas you compare that to today, where now, Facebook is one of the largest companies in the world, which bought up a bunch of other social startups, right? And I just think, things have changed, and it's not, I don't know that social startups are as hot anymore. They probably aren't, and really it's dominated now by a few giant players in the market. So that's certainly a different thing. I mean, also when we started, there was very much the sense like, okay, build something, see if you can get it to be big, and then you can figure out how to make money later. Like that was kind of the general attitude on things, and I guess that kind of worked for some people, but now there's very much a feeling that no, you have to have a business model from the start. What is it? It should be clear, it should be understandable, and you maybe even should be making money before you raise any outside investment, because why not? If you can, like, you should do that. I think in general, yeah, there was a sense that wasn't as important, whereas now it is clearly very important. And one of the first things people would ask you about as an investor, and even us, with the LendFest Institute, we're a nonprofit, but we still are very focused on revenue models and creating a sustainable journalism, which means you have to have the business model figured out.
And I think that's really important, because it would be fair to say that one of the reasons journalism is in the position it's in is there was this understanding that no one needed to know how the money was made if you were a reporter or an editor. The business will kind of take care of itself. Not only do you need not know, you should not know how the money is made.
Right.
And so it's different in the startup world, right?
It was, but yeah, I mean, yeah, it is different. I mean, sure, you do need to know how the money's made, and it's a business. I mean, that's, I mean, what you're building first and foremost. I think that was maybe some of our challenge too, that we were very mission and product focused at Storify, and we didn't think as much about the business model, which I think, you know, we should have figured out sooner if we weren't going to be a scale thing that, you know, get to billions of users and you'll figure out the money later. Well, no, you're a product that is really heavily used by a certain group of people. So therefore, this is the business model that makes sense. You know, therefore you charge people to use the product. You know, so it was kind of a challenge to figure that out. And I guess right now you see with this shutdown, I mean, yeah, the part of the product that is continuing is the one that you have to pay for, not the free one, because there's no real business model attached to it.
Correct. Well, let's talk a little bit about the LenFest Institute. Tell us about it and its origin and what it does and how people can get involved.
Yeah, so it's a new nonprofit foundation founded by Jerry Lenfest, who is a cable entrepreneur who sold his cable company to Comcast and did quite well. And he bought the Philadelphia Inquirer and basically set up this structure to kind of protect it from some of the problems we've seen facing other local newspapers like the Denver Post and elsewhere that are owned by outside kind of private equity hedge fund owners. So he bought the newspaper, which includes the Inquirer, the Philadelphia Daily News, Philly.com, put those into a B Corp, a public benefit corp, then donated that company to this nonprofit, which is the Lenfest Institute for Journalism, which he gave its own separate endowment to, and to have a broader mission to actually, you know, figure out how to save local journalism. So it's kind of like an interesting model. We have a newspaper and a, you know, local kind of test kitchen where we can do experiments here in Philadelphia, but we also, you know, are interested in innovation, obviously happening in many parts of the country and the world around local media. So we do other collaborations and partnerships with other newspapers, with other foundations, with tech companies, including Facebook. We have a project with them, and also, you know, fund other experiments around the country.
That's great. How can people get involved? Do you give grants? What is the story? I'm a local newspaper guy or gal. I'm listening. I want to get involved. How does this work?
We have given grants. We're figuring out what that's going to look like in the future. So that's one way. We do projects where we work directly with local newspapers. There's this thing that's called the Knight Lenfest Newsroom Initiative. So it's a partnership with the Knight Foundation where we kind of work in a very hands-on way together with some partners about, you know, how can newsrooms transform themselves and become truly digital operations. We have a project with Facebook that's around digital subscriptions and how to get people to, you know, pay for subscriptions online, and that includes some of the, you know, leading people who think about this, including a bunch of ex-New York Times people who launched their digital subscriptions. So there's all sorts of ways to get engaged with us, and I would even encourage people, if you're working on something interesting, to just let me know, and we can think about something to do together.
That's great. And they can just go onto the website and just look it all up, right? lenfestinstitute.org?
That's right. Yeah. lenfestinstitute.org. Yes. And and we're, you know, kind of thinking of some new projects. Again, we're you know, things that are both based within legacy media, but, you know, really kind of pushing the boundaries on what you can do. And really, I guess our key focus is on both, you know, this revenue question, how do we create sustainable business, but also the product of local news, like what should it look like? I haven't seen much change in what a news site looks like from even the, you know, 90s when the internet first and the web first launched. I mean, they kind of look the same as they always did. So I think there's all sorts of interesting new things we could be doing on product innovation using, you know, smartphones and location and other data that you could gather from a city to create a much more compelling local news and information experience. So I really think we're just barely at the start of this, and to really think about how we could connect people to each other in cities where you literally live next to everybody who might be reading the same article, but you don't know that you're all reading that article, and there's no way for you to actually get together and do something about what's being discussed in the article. So kind of thinking about ways to integrate, in-person and online life.
Well, that's a big task, right? So you also founded Hacks and Hackers, or co-founded Hacks and Hackers. Talk a little bit about that and what that is exactly, and the relationship between Hacks and Hackers.
Yeah, so this was a group I kind of started actually before Storify, to bring together journalists and technologists to talk about the future of journalism and media. So it's now spread all around the world. There's some really active groups in places like London, Buenos Aires, and actually lately we've kind of pushed into a lot of work around the problem of misinformation. So Jennifer Aitley, who's one of my co-founders with this, has been running a series of events called MisinfoCon, which kind of brings together journalists, technologists, academics, researchers to talk about the problem of misinformation and what can be done about it. We're actually putting on one of these in Kiev later this month.
Wow, nice.
So that should be pretty cool. So that's kind of been a focus area. But in general, the idea is to just kind of, think about ways that the two fields can learn from each other and collaborate.
I think it's really important as everything is changing all around us. In terms of what you see as the differences between the tech folks and the reward folks, if you will, or the picture folks, and where are the things more in common than most people think, or is there really a gulf?
I don't know, with all the stuff lately going on with Facebook and everything, and the kind of backlash against technology, I start to wonder if people are further apart than ever. Yeah, I mean, the tech world has this great optimism about things, and I do wonder if some of the products that have been built would have been built if people were so concerned about, oh my God, what if the Russians want to use this to manipulate US elections? Like, who would have thought of that? Mark Zuckerberg sitting in his dorm room, as he liked to say during his testimony to Congress, like he wouldn't have thought about that. And maybe he shouldn't have thought about that because maybe that would have been too scary and he would have never built Facebook. So I kind of understand in some ways why, like, to be able to build these things, you can't be so fearful of the risks, but at the same time, it does seem like there has been a clear lack often in the ethical considerations and values, and building the future of journalism and media and all that doesn't mean we throw away everything that came before. So I do think there's a way that journalists could play a role in this by bringing those values and ethics to the table.
And it's something that you teach in your work with the startups, right, at the Institute?
I mean, we're just trying to get people to talk more and hope they understand each other in some way. Yeah, I mean, a lot of there is still a goal. I mean, a lot of the startups that we work with the Institute are probably more coming out of maybe journalism related things, or people who do have some connection to journalism. I guess I really do want to keep bridging the gap to the tech world and think about ways we could apply, technology innovations to journalism and kind of get developers who are building those products to see this as an interesting thing. But it really is kind of, can we build understanding? Can local news organizations, attract talented tech people to help with some of these things? I think, perhaps we do have more of an opportunity than ever, especially after the last president, people kind of wanting to do good in the world, do things that have a mission to them to help, democracy. And I think, so that's an opportunity there that we should be pushing in the journalism world to try to attract new talent and interest in journalism, which I do think is essential to democracy.
And speaking of democracy and everything that's going on, we're talking in the shadow of the Salt Lake Tribune losing 1/3 of its newsroom because of financial difficulties. And one of the sentences was highlighted by Rose Horowitz on Twitter. She says she pulled out, paid online subscriptions are already in the thousands, managers have said, but the resulting revenue stream has not been enough to stem ongoing budget shortfalls. Is there any business model that can work for local newspapers?
It can work. We are trying to figure out the plan for how you can do that. I mean, it is true that probably the newsrooms not be as big as they once were. But that said, you're also not needing to produce the print edition that you once were. So you should be able to save costs there, save costs on delivery trucks and printing presses and all these things. I mean, there is a path to make this work. It just might not look exactly like it once did. And the functions of a local newspaper, which, kind of aggregated everything, might be done by a few different entities in a city, right? It might be that there's a different local blog that covers the tech industry in that town that runs events, and that's how they're able to make money. And there might be a food site that lives off of referral revenue by pointing people to make reservations at different restaurants. I mean, there are different ways to make this work. It's not going to look exactly like it did. Probably the biggest challenge, I think, is the serious investigative journalism. This is a problem that lots of people have pointed to, but we've seen even how that can work in some models supported by potentially nonprofit or membership models in cities. So there are ways to make this work, but we can't be focused on saving the paper. We have to save the journalism.
I like that. Let's focus on saving the journalism and not saving just the paper. I like that. I think this is an early analogy that people made about the internet and compared it to the airlines and the railroads, right? The railroads thought they were in the railway business, but they were really in the transportation business. And they let these airplane things come and take over. Would that be fair still?
Yeah, and for me, I guess I even wonder, like, what is the role? Like, is it even are we in the news business and not the newspaper business, or are we in the maybe we're actually in the beaning business and we didn't even realize it? Like, maybe having a paper is more about like the fact that everybody in the city kind of has the same general information of what's going on and is able to have they're able to have a common conversation because we share some knowledge. And that's more the real purpose than the specific like stories that we're talking about. So I think even kind of thinking about that, like it's maybe more the agenda setting, like what is on the front page, what is the top story that people care about, and kind of just giving people a framework to connect with each other in some way, hopefully in constructive ways.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge. So as we wind up here, I just want to talk a little bit, just remind people about how they can take their Storify pages and download them. There's a export functionality that they have thankfully put right on the front page of Storify. So I'm going to be spending tonight and tomorrow downloading all of these pages and having a record of it at least. But I've always said that your kind of favorite things on the internet will die, and this is just an example of it. And I'm remembering there was a tool called Catch there was a KATCH that did something with Periscope that was so good. But I guess what happened in these companies is that unless there's really mass adoption for certain features, they will move on to something else. Like I've always complained that Facebook doesn't let you do, like live highlights was a thing that you could highlight on your Facebook feed, and now they don't let you do that. And companies have to think in a different way from consumers, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are, I guess, there are costs to keeping these things running, keeping servers up and being able to produce things, unlike a physical thing where you buy it, you can take it home and you keep it, right? There's nothing required in terms of upkeep costs. So it is kind of sad. I mean, with Storify, it is like we sort of pioneered this idea of using social media, inside stories and whatever, but then all the platforms themselves launched embeddable formats. Like now you can embed a tweet and embed a Instagram photo and a Facebook post directly from the platform. So in some ways there are alternatives, I guess. And I mean, even this concept of stories, I think, has taken off, and now Facebook has stories everywhere, kind of copying Instagram stories and all that. The idea that you do want to make sense of these social media streams by just highlighting selected things. I don't know. I don't know how much we might have influenced that. I would like to take a tiny bit of credit in some way, but who knows?
Take the credit. No one's going to dispute it, so it's good. You should take
right.
it. But I can certainly say you put the idea of the stories and making things last longer and holding them accountable in a way by, like, the things that people post mattered because they would live on beyond the shelf life that was so short in the old days. And now Twitter has moments, which I like, but it's not Storify because it's only Twitter. And Twitter has no interest in letting you embed Instagrams in there and YouTube videos, and you guys were really kind of so open and not taking sides. It made a difference.
Yeah, I mean, but it was, yeah, and I that was what we were trying to do from the start. Originally, we were working on a different product that was just around Twitter, and I was very adamant, like, no, this cannot be just Twitter. We have to include other platforms. That said, that's also the risk. If you're building something that relies on other platforms, it's hard. I mean, Facebook, in response to some of this recent, Cambridge Analytica scandal and all that, they've cut off a lot of access to a lot of the APIs. I haven't dug into it, but probably this would have made it harder to do something like Storify, to be able to take posts and move them around. Twitter, we were always kind of, are they going to cut us off? Are they not going to cut us off? Do they like what we're doing? Do they not like it? It's really hard when you build something on somebody else's platform and you're relying on them.
Right. I was looking at a chart that I tweeted this morning. I'll just read it to you as we kind of wind down here. And this was looking at FAGA, Facebook, Amazon, Google, and Apple, and their valuations in 2008 versus today. So in 2008, their valuation was about $32 billion, these four huge organizations now. But in those days, there were only $32 billion altogether. Today, as you can imagine, the number is a lot bigger. So it was not 32 billion. It was 364 billion in 2008, which is obviously a huge number for Apple, Amazon, Google, Facebook, right? Today,
right,
the same four are, as you may know, $3 trillion. And
okay.
and so what does that tell us? I think it tells us that what you described as more consolidation, more power going to more, fewer of these companies is happening around us.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. Like I said, yeah, it used to be everybody had a social media company in San Francisco. Now there's consolidation. I don't know. Some of the hype around blockchain, I guess, is a way to maybe try to do something new again, but that's still very experimental, and the jury remains out on that. So I don't know. Will we see regulation step in? Would Facebook be broken up because it has too much power? I don't know. Yeah, we are in an interesting time for sure.
Yeah. Well, you have a front row seat in that new exciting time because of the work at the Lanfest Institute, and we're very grateful for your time, Burt. And I just want to once again just thank you and your team for building out Storify and how it helped thousands, hundreds of thousands of people over these years, helped people with kind of commemorating their own important events. It helped people with their client work. It helped people make money. It helped people get sponsorships. It helped me in so many ways. And I don't know if you've ever felt thanked enough, but on behalf of all of our users, if I may just say thank you for doing something different and having an impact. And do you regret selling out to the bigger organization, or how does that work in your thinking?
Well, thanks for your very kind words. Yeah, I guess in some way we do regret selling. I think we did. We were trying to figure out the business model, and kind of we're struggling to make things, make ends meet by the time we would run out of money and need to raise money and prove that the business model was working and all this stuff. So that's why we kind of were in a situation where we needed to sell to keep it going. But no, I do think we kind of regretted it afterward. And I guess I don't know. I should not live in the past, although sometimes I do tend to dwell in the past. But yeah, it was kind
but
of
another
an
way to look at
amazing
it,
thing we had going, yeah.
But another way to look at it is letting it go freed you to do other things, and that's also important. Otherwise, you would be still kind of fighting over embed codes and whatever else in the relatively small arena. Now you're helping other people do their things, right? And you're thinking about the future of a much larger landscape than you would be if you were running a relatively small operation.
Yeah, well, and I do think some of the lessons learned about creating a better user experience for journalists, thinking about new forms of storytelling. All right, we're trying to figure out ways to do this more broadly all the time across the entire industry. So yeah, I definitely take all the learnings from that, and I'm trying to keep on fighting the good fight to basically, yeah, keep journalism relevant in the digital age and figure out what stories should be, what journalism should be, as we do have all these amazing new, technologies to interact with each other and reach people all around the world. What do we what should journalism become? We're in the middle of figuring it out.
Yep, and that's exciting. And so, folks, please follow Burt. He's at Burt Herman, Burtherman. I also read it as Burtherman, if you're not paying attention carefully. So, but I also like to think Burt the Man also works. But our guest has been Burt Herman. Follow him, please, and also follow Lenfest Inst, which is the lenfestinstitute.org. Check out what they're doing. They're working at the edge of where journalism and sustainability and the future of journalism meet. And Burt's going to stop by Social Media Weekend. I look forward to introducing him to the audience and getting him a sustained applause for everything he's done for all of us. So thank you very much, Burt, and I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. And thanks.
Thank you.
And go get your Storify pages out, export your own pages.
Right.
Once you want. I've got to go do that myself. Yeah. Thanks very much, Burt. Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye.